Welcome to the Customer Wins podcast, where business leaders discuss their secrets and techniques for helping their customers succeed and in turn grow their business.
Hi, I'm Rich Walker, the host of The Customer Wins, where I talk to business leaders about how they help their customers win and how their focus on customer experience leads to growth. Today is a special episode in my series on artificial intelligence, and today's guest is Mamal Amini, CEO and co-founder of GovernGPT. We've had a few other guests in this series, and you can check them out, including Elaine Boyd of BGBO Company and Gabe Rissman of Your Stake. And today's episode is brought to you by Quick, the leader in enterprise forms processing. When your business relies upon processing forms, don't waste your team's valuable time reviewing the forms. Instead, get Quick. Using our Form Extract API, simply submit your completed forms and get back clean, context-rich data that is 99.9% accurate. Visit quickforms.com to get started. Before I fully introduce today's guest, I want to give a big thank you to Param Nasseri of InvestorCom for introducing me to Mamal. Go check out their website at investorcom.com to learn how they turn regulatory obligations into your advantage. So today I'm super excited to talk with an actual AI scientist. Mamal Amini is the co-founder and CEO of GovernGPT, which performs real-time reviews of marketing collateral for advisory firms. GovernGPT reviews marketing materials as if the chief compliance officer were reviewing them themselves. So content creators, now think teams in investor relations, sales, business development, marketing, they have access to compliance reviews in real time. So by the time collateral is submitted to compliance, it's in really good shape. Mamal, welcome to the Customer Wins.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, mine too. I'm excited to talk to you. If you haven't heard this podcast before, I talk with business leaders about what they're doing to help their customers win, how they built and deliver a great customer experience, and the challenges to growing their own company. Mamal, let's understand your business a little better. How does your company help people?
We're at the essence of the collaboration tool so that the marketing, sales, investor relations teams can collaborate with the compliance and legal teams in a much faster and smoother process. We review collateral in real time with AI by essentially emulating the way CCO would have given those reviews, give those judgments in real time to the salespeople who create the content, so that this process is in general a lot smoother, while in the meantime save a lot of time, make sure content is consistent and everything gets reviewed, and there's just fewer likelihood of churn for salespeople who create the content.
So I remember when I was an advisor, now this is over 20 years ago, so things have changed. If I wanted to send out an email campaign to clients, if I wanted to put together a one-page sheet on my company, it would take my broker dealer 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks to review and approve it and then tell me it's wrong or change it. So I don't know if that's true today. What is your product actually doing then to make that process easier?
So we have an AI that's trained on, SEC's, for example, regulations, how a compliance officer would essentially review collateral by default. So then it'll flag anything that needs to be flagged in terms of a language that's promissory, any disclaimers that need to be added, anything that's cherry picking, if a chart needs to be analyzed to understand if it's essentially adjusting to what the SEC's marketing group wants you to behave as. The best right now in the market is essentially how ACA operates, which is about 3 days, which is humans reviewing this. Okay. Whereas with AI, you can get that judgment in real time as content is getting created. And whatever the content may be, as long as it can be converted into text, we essentially analyze it and give those judgments in real time.
Okay, so look, I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but my head's kind of thinking, is this like Grammarly? Is this kind of like sitting with you and helping you craft the better message?
Yeah, you nail it. So Grammarly, for somebody who doesn't speak English as the first language, is perfect, right? Because you just don't think about English all day long because that's not your first language, right? I use it all the time. Now, if you're in a, let's say, are in an RIA or in a broker dealer and you work there not as a compliance person, you don't think about compliance day in and day out. Whereas you want the collateral that you create to be compliant, whether it's an email, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a sales pitch or anything that you're taking to the investors, you essentially need that to be compliant. So what you currently do is you send it to the compliance reviews it, comes back to you, you take care of the reviews, goes back, final approval. Whereas imagine this whole process becomes one round. So you pre-review everything with our AI, and then by the time it goes to compliance, it just gets an approval.
Wow. Do you have any metrics on that? Like, are you seeing that 99% of things get approved the first time, or what? I'm just curious.
It's a matter of pattern recognition. So like off the start, it starts with like anywhere from 30 to 50%. But then we onboard essentially clients, then we take care of their company attributes. So if they have any library of disclosures, if they have any policies, any guidelines, any internal bulletins that they've had before. So we take all of that into account to give the feedback as if, again, their own CCO would have given those feedbacks. And then we take the past reviews. So it essentially becomes a version of the CCO by giving those feedbacks. So, and then it's gotten to the point of right now, with the firms we work with, it's gotten to the point of 90% approval automatically because it's pattern recognition at the end of the day. So the more it's seen, the more it knows exactly how to give those comments and reviews.
So you guys are pretty early then. I mean, your product's fairly new, right?
Yeah, we are. I mean, this whole technology is. So this whole technology as a whole was only accessible to, anybody outside of OpenAI and Google only in the last year essentially. I used to these types of technologies before.
And so what made you say I want to solve this problem? I mean, other than the enamor with GPT models, which is fascinating, what made you choose this problem?
It's more of a communication with your clients. You pick a section of the market and you try to talk to them and you understand their setup. We actually had 2 different problems that we solved. We had 2 different products that were live. Still last one is live, that still has active users, which is CCOs are using that one. This problem is something that's really urgent, and it captures the level of value that I believe compliance officers would really appreciate, which is reduced risk at the essence of it.
Yeah. And speed. I mean, just the fact that things can get done faster is amazing.
Yeah, we have just a much faster turnaround time, and obviously in the meantime saves time too. So
yeah. Okay, let me ask you maybe a tough question. You named your company GovernGPT, and I presume it's to recognize ChatGPT. But do most people know what GPT really means and the impact of it?
I don't think so. It's but it's fine. I mean, it's transformer, it's the transformer models that that actually originally came out of Google, and then OpenAI created the first GPT, and then OpenAI made newer versions up to right now, which is you have GPT-4. But all these models, I mean, usually you have 2 types of these. You have either GPT type or you have BERT type. But they're all essentially, it's just how you train them, but they all essentially do the same thing: predict language by seeing the likelihood of words next to each other. And most of the corpus of language that I've usually trained it on is just English.
Got it. Yeah. So I mean, it does make sense. I mean, I think enough people have seen ChatGPT. It's the buzzword everywhere we go, that they're aligning with it, right? So look, let me lean on the scientist here. What does GPT stand for?
Generative pre-training transformers.
Transformers. Okay. Yeah, and I can never remember that. I knew the generative part.
Pre-training is the fact that you can pre-train these models without actually having data specific, which is like what used to be before with machine learning models.
Yeah.
That's why AI is now more accessible to people, because you can have these models that already come with a lot of good biases of how we do things in life. So for example, ChatGPT understands English language really well.
Got it. So the machine learning languages are really, you train it on over time, but GPT has it's kind of like programming languages, right? They used to be machine and then basic and then a 3rd level and a 4th level. So they're building on top of each other, right? Is that a fair way to look at it?
It is. It's you can then fine tune these models and make it better. And which is one of the things we've done. At the essence of it, in terms of grand scheme of things for everybody, it's sort of becoming software engineering to become you can have a faster feedback loop, right? What used to happen is every time before in machine learning, these generative models, you had to train everything from scratch. Every time you wanted to train something. I mean, you could have predictive models that essentially use these pre-trained set of weights, but then again, as long as you pre-train them, then you can reuse them. And this used to happen in computer vision, for images and image analysis, objects for like essentially just like image and computer vision. But this was not the case for language on a broad set of tasks before the access of GPTs. It was only done with like specific tasks one at a time for each model.
Okay.
Let's say you want to do summarization or question answering. These are different tasks in language. So then you would have trained or pre-trained each of these models for a specific task. Whereas right now, ChatGPT can do all of them.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm so glad we're talking about this. I mean, I know a bit about AI. I've studied a lot of it, but you're helping give me some insights as to how this actually works. So I want to ask another question about training. You've trained the model to be like the CCO, the Chief Compliance Officer. And my question is really two things. First one is, as it's processing documents or language for people, is it learning from that? Is it training itself again from that? Or is it only applying what it has been trained on to correct the document?
It starts with what's been trained upon. It really depends on a firm to firm if they want. We have a we have a 0-day retention policy, so we don't keep any of the data, but so that it essentially captures, and while at the same time it anonymizes every data, it captures the level of judgments that a CCO would give if they choose that to be the case. So we have clients right now that just use the base model, and we have clients that essentially fine-tune it for them for their specific purposes. The thing is, the results become, anywhere, as I said, like with the base model, it starts to save you like 50% time, whereas with the fine-tuned model, it gets to all the way to 90-95%. And smaller firms have been more than willing to actually share and be willing to use it right now. When I'm saying smaller, I mean under 15 billion assets under management.
Okay. So then let me ask a different question. I was going to ask, if you have a base model, is that what you upgrade over time as your product set?
Yeah, so we have scrapers built off of regulators' websites or any like enforcement action say comes out. So, one of the things we're doing is like, let's say, with the recent fines that happened with the RIAs, that because of hypothetical performance, like 9 firms got fined. Now, any fine that comes out, we essentially take that fine and run it against every past collateral they've had. So that if, say, you had a collateral from 5 years ago and you have a hypothetical performance claim, you don't have the right disclaimers or the right policies essentially informing of that, then it can go and find it for you. So it tells you like, hey, you need to pay attention to this. It gives a suggestion of how to go about it, but like the first step is like you have tens of thousands of documents to go through, and it's almost humanly impossible to go through that while you still have a lot of other work that the company requires you to do and review, and a lot of other tasks that goes on in compliance. That's not just reviewing collateral.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that you guys can be backwards facing as well as forward facing. One of the things I keep thinking about is if you train this model really well, it's going to do a great job, right? And you're saying that you don't retain the information that it's processing. So it's not constantly training itself, right? It's not reading somebody's document and saying, oh, I've learned something new and I'll apply that to my model itself, right?
It's not the model that gets used for everybody. It's for each individual client, because what we found is it's entirely irrelevant to use even. First of all, we don't do any cross-sharing, but like it doesn't even make sense technically to do so, because what's unique to one RIA is not like, it's very unique to them and not the next RIA. So like their understanding of risk, and it's always conditioned on a lot of company attributes. What are the products you have? Who's your audience? When are you putting out collateral? What is the collateral you're going out with? Is it emails? Is it pitch decks?
Yeah.
What is it RFPs? Like, to what extent do you want to pay attention to each in terms of risk and how risky you want to be? To what extent do you want to add the disclaimers? Where do you want to add the disclaimers? Do you have your own specific way of doing it? So there's a lot of nuance that goes into this that just makes it almost practically useless to even do so, like the model itself. So, but the model has that judgment learned for each individual client if they want that.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense. I mean, I was thinking about that with different styles of companies, but that essentially means you could take a base model and permutate it any number of ways to meet the needs of all of your different types of customers. Do their individual models get updated and trained over time with their own content, or do you maintain a base model like footprint for them too?
So we have a base model, and then each model of themselves is also having, let's say, recency bias. For example, that's one of the things we always want to have, because, you know, if their understanding of risk changes across time, because maybe they're now grown, or they're at a different type of firm, or maybe there's a new regulation that came into effect, obviously the AI is aware, but at the same time, the CCO is never going to be, essentially, the AI is never going to know this better than the CCO. The CCO knows this best, right? So if the CCO gives a past review that says that comes today versus a review that was given 2 years ago, we always make the AI try to emulate the way the review was given today.
Mm-hmm.
So it keeps learning for that specific firm, right? And then there's like new products that you open up, you know, you have a new investor, you have a new set of investors, and like maybe they again care about different things. So you have your own innovations as the CCO, and those innovations again get taken into account for that specific firm.
So Mamal, this must mean that this lends itself really well to be a software as a service company, meaning AI models like this, because you need to keep them moving forward. Like that, you said recency bias. I like that idea, right? Bias to what's more recent in regulation and law.
Yeah.
So your customers must be looking at you to maintain the model over time to keep it valuable to them, right? It's not just I bought it and I'm done, right?
No. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why we even start with, essentially it's just a subscription model. So it just makes more sense for software companies like us and them themselves too, because they can test it out, see how it works, does it even work for them or not? And then, they can essentially get rid of it with any moment they want, right? So it makes sense to them. It also makes sense for us because it forces us to be, far more customer serving at the end of the day. So that's why if you look at our product, like we have customers that right now have seen the speed at which we've been like iterating week after week after week after week. So if you even follow like my LinkedIn, probably for the last 6 months, you will notice that like I've released product like 6 months ago, and I released product like last week, and it's an order of magnitude difference. Now, obviously, someone can say, well, why don't they wait? But you can, but that's up to you. Like you don't wait for like YouTube to get updated 10 years from now because it delivers value to you today, right? So
right. Yeah. No, you've actually said a couple of really important things. One of which I've echoed on prior episodes, and that is, as a software as a service based company, getting paid monthly or annually consistently over time gives you an incentive as the product owner to keep making your product better. And I think that's a real value to customers. That's why I don't think buying a product once and being done is a good idea. I think paying for it incrementally over time and watching that vendor continually improve their product helps you judge whether it's still valuable. If they're not improving, you stop paying them. They're like, you're not keeping it up. I'm not going to keep doing this.
Yeah, the motto is make something people want. And that's not you don't do it once and you're done. You just have to keep iterating. The world is an ever-changing world. That's the world we're living in, whether it's the regulations or not. That's just like life. Life is constantly changing. So you have to constantly iterate, constantly improve, and constantly listen to your customers, listen to your users. So, stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have 2 new releases. So
That's awesome. Let me ask you a slightly different question. I mean, you have a really, really deep background in artificial intelligence, right? I mean, I was looking at your bio. You've done some deep learning, you've done machine learning. Tell me more about what that background's like and what you were doing.
Yeah, I used to be working at this lab, which is world's largest AI lab, essentially. Published a lot of papers with different, geniuses, essentially. Worked with Yoshua Bengio, for example, who's one of Nobel Prize winners of AI, the Alan Turing Award of computer science. My apologies. I worked on many different spaces, from natural language processing to reinforcement learning. Who was my supervisor at the time? She's one of the OG reinforcement learning people in the world, and so like essentially anywhere from fundamental AI to deep learning to optimizations for deep learning models, for computer vision models to essentially make them more robust, for reinforcement learning, which is essentially decision making. I try to build models and publish papers and innovate there.
Nice.
After that, then I joined for big corporate and small startups, really large, really late stage startups at the point that they've had. I think the last startup I worked at had $1 billion funding, and we built GPTs there.
No, that is so cool. What did you get your degree in?
Computer science.
Computer science. Do
Undergrad and
you,
master's both.
if other people want to follow your path, what would you recommend they do?
Just do something that you find really fun and you're willing to spend hours on it. I think whatever you do is going to be that. If you mean AI, then I'm not sure if AI in 10 years is going to be the same AI now, because obviously I think AI right now is more engineering than science, which is why I myself went from like publishing papers and patents to building GPTs. I wasn't building as many, I wasn't working on the fundamental like most recently, right? Before that, I was doing that. So like and that shift was like, because that's just what the world needs right now, because AI science has reached a point that we really need to democratize access to AI democratize access of AI to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
To other industries, like compliance here, like financial services.
AI is such a fascinating thing to me because, look, I'm from the generation that didn't have the internet, saw the internet come, saw e-commerce happen, saw the advent of Google. I mean, when I started developing software for my company, I love to tell the story that if I need to solve a problem, I went to Barnes and Noble, I went to Borders bookstore, I sat on the floor for hours reading books, trying to find answers. Today, you just go on Stack Overflow and say, what's the answer? Or you go to ChatGPT and say, what's the answer?
Yeah.
So it's remarkable how things have changed. But with AI, you can go learn so much on your own without having been a scientist. But yet I envy your background of all the deep work that you did to really, truly understand it. So I guess part of my question is, how much does somebody have to dive into the depth that you've dove into to be able to build a company like you're building and solve these types of problems? And I know you're biased, but I want you to confront that bias.
I don't know. I feel like I feel like at the end of the day, you always end up saying like, well, you just got to focus on the next thing rather than like what's been done already, so that you don't really, quote unquote, validate yourself further and like constantly focus on like what you can do to improve. And that's usually been my focus in general for forever. What can you do to build a company like me? I think, to be honest, you really need to understand like what these language models do at the core of it. What are their limitations? Where do they really lack? Because like, for example, in the world of compliance and legal, they really care about that exactness, right? Like ChatGPT is really good for language, but it's really not good to be sure to be relied upon. And that's literally the first problem we solved like a year ago, with our previous product. Obviously we have that now too, but it was like the first product we built was like, how do you make sure you trust AI? Because you don't want to trust AI. Like, it's just made up stuff really at the end of the day. So how do you do that, right? You find the right source every time it, generates any line. So you tell it exactly this is where it's coming from. And so that, if let's say a compliance officer wants to validate that, they can validate it for themselves, so they can see, they have access to that. And I think that's part of it, right? So you need to understand the limitations and its strengths. And then when it comes to building and that's on the scientific side of it and engineering side of it, obviously, like you want to go about how to build it. And there's 1,000 blog posts right now that you could look into. And then I think on the business side of it, you really need to understand how much each costs, how much of these models cost, how big are they, how much data do you need? Do you need data? What's the data that you need? Can you, get, say, some advisor to help you train these models? Like right now we have an ex-SEC regulator, ex-CCO of like major banks in the US who's helping us with this base model, so that the base model becomes in a state that's already almost perfect. So like, even if, you don't want it to be tuned based on your judgments, that's okay. Like the base model does a pretty decent job.
So are these customers that are helping you?
This one is an investor/advisor who's helping us with it.
Okay. Gotcha. No,
so I also help us and give feedback like regularly. So we have like customers and they tell us like, oh, well, how do you make sure, the salespeople use it all the time? So we're like, that's one of the things we're releasing next week, to essentially have it as a plugin to Google Docs and Word documents, so that you could see the judgments, from compliance in real time, but then you can click accept, reject. So you can immediately get the document updated. So the document to compliance is going to be like, just a lot easier for salespeople and marketing folk and IR to essentially adopt this.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really fascinating that you solved that problem of accuracy or correctness. I had a lawyer in the food industry on this show a couple of months ago, George Salmus, and he talked about a group of lawyers who use ChatGPT to help them bolster their case. And they went in front of the judge and they quoted case law that does not exist. I mean, and they got thrown out of court for it. Like you're just making stuff up. You can't necessarily trust the AIs, right? But you are building products in order to be able to trust them.
Right. That's exactly like one of our first points and one of our constant themes is like it's a trust building exercise. So we start with almost always, the simplest task that's already been repeated many times. For example, we're working with two firms that are both an investor advisor and a broker dealer. So then if they have collateral that's more on one side, we start fine tuning it for that specific set of collateral they already have. They already have pretty clear documents. If everything is pretty documented, it makes it a lot easier for the model again to be fine tuned towards that direction. And at the end of the day, the compliance officer has to approve or disapprove of how the AI is doing. So the AI is constantly essentially getting tuned into the desires or the understanding and the judgments of the chief compliance officer. So the chief compliance officer at the end of the day is the one who controls how the AI should give the reviews to marketing, sales.
Yeah, right.
So that
All right,
level of control and trust is always there. My apologies.
I had this kind of question in my head to ask. You've answered it in a couple of ways, but I want to just ask it instead of me summarize. I want to ask it again and let you kind of direct it, which is if you were counseling somebody to find a software product that is AI driven, a large language model driven product, how would you tell them to choose the product? How would you tell them how to go about choosing such a product? What's important in that decision-making process?
I think you need to see how it will actually impact you in your life rather than just like, you want to quantify exactly what it is quantifying for, because like in general, I found that a lot of people are just interested in using AI tools, and that's great because, we started building AI tools and a lot of people are using the previous ones. It's just like, you want to be very process driven. And I think, and this is also a thing you will see with companies, if they're focused on too many different processes, probably they're not optimizing for one specific thing very, very well to get it perfectly. And that's, I'm not saying everyone, but the odds are if they're not Google and you haven't heard of them, and if they're not Google, the process that comes out of them, the product that comes out of them, it's almost practically impossible to get it into perfect shape before that process is optimized fully. So we know a few companies, for example, in our own space that they try to solve everything with AI, and that's cool, but at the same time, the feedback I hear from clients is that, well, yeah, it doesn't do the job. So I think that's one of the obvious signs. You really want to look at the team who's building it, look at their background, because like, again, if they're not Google, they don't have the same quality assurances essentially.
Right.
So, you really want to look at the background, because I've seen firms, and don't get me wrong, I love salespeople. I've seen firms that are 60 to 70% are made up of salespeople. And like, if they're not made up of product engineers or, AI scientists, in my opinion, obviously I'm biased, in my opinion, they're not innovating on the product side left and right. They're not getting it to the perfect state. They're not able to get it to that level of trust building exercise, which is exactly what, at the very least, I know lawyers want. Lawyers or compliance professionals, they want to be able to trust the AI if they're saying something. That's the whole gist of essentially how to work with lawyers. And lawyers really they really are tech forward. I've met a lot of tech forward lawyers that are just like really interesting, and they tell me, hey, like, I just need to trust it. And that's totally fair. So like, you want to have a level of security. You want to have you want to host your models on something like AWS, which is what exactly CIA uses. You want to anonymize your data. So like, you really want to care about essentially anonymization and confidentiality of IP. So like, that's really, really important. You want to like mention that you have the 0-day retention policy, which a lot of AI companies don't. And I asked, why not? But at the same time, I think these all contribute to how much you want to contribute to the client's process and work and daily life.
Yeah. So I want to summarize a few things that I've heard in this, and this has just been amazing to hear from you on this. When you're looking at a product that's driven by a large language model, like a GPT, like AI, number one, you want a company that is built a model that can be trusted and valid. Two, you want to know they're going to consistently build and evolve the model over time, because it's going to change over time. And if they're not doing that, right? So let me ask you one more question. We're going to have to wrap up here in a second. And you've said so many amazing things, Mamal. So I don't know if you have one more to add, but what is something you know about AI that maybe most people don't know?
I think these language models, as cool as they are, a lot of people are now assuming that we're getting close to, artificial general intelligence, or like AI is going to take over. And I think that's a, premature way of thinking, because what's really happened is we had horses and then we got cars, so and then it took us a long time to get to autonomous driving. And even then, still humans are making the decisions, the high level strategic decisions. And what we've found throughout history is always that we're going to innovate and become innovative ourselves as humans with the technological capabilities that are out there. AI is not going to take over. It's only going to, augment the processes, and you can delegate it as if you have, every one of us has an AI assistant for every task we want to do. I think that's the world we're going to aim for. And that's the world, I believe, in the next 5 to 10 years, that's what's going to happen. Every compliance professional is going to have an AI assistant. So is every other professional literally in the world. You will have an AI assistant that you can delegate some tasks to it as if you have a real human assistant, that you're training, and it does the tasks that you clearly define and you give it, and then it does it on autopilot, and then comes back, you check, good to go. So it saves you time, it saves you headaches, and you can focus on more higher leverage tasks.
Well, and I think you demonstrate that just by the focus of your product. You're building a niche product for a very specific purpose within specific types of companies, and you're not making that a public model for everybody to consume. So in order to get to this point where there's one model for the whole world, I don't think we'll get there. I don't know that that's ever going to happen, because I don't think companies are going to share all their models with everybody, and then suddenly there's this one model that knows the world and controls us all.
Yeah, and also I think people think about the word data and they ignore the fact that there's a process. Process beats data, always.
Yeah.
If you understand process very well, even if you don't have the data, right now with these generative models, you can get a really good result.
Yeah, awesome. Mamal, look, as we wrap this up, I have another question for you. But before I ask that question, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Mamal, Mamal Amini. On LinkedIn, I'm always active. Regularly, I check my LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah, I found you there. You've got a lot of good stuff going on. Okay, here's my last question. Who has had the biggest impact on your leadership style or how you approach your role?
It's the guy who founded Monzo. He's been helping us think about this from different angles, and he's really been immensely helpful. Tom Blumfield is he's just like we've talked regularly in the last 6 months, one of our major investors, and just like been with YC, with Y Combinator, and it's just been truly a gift, because I think the other day he told me imagine the most formidable versions of yourself, and become that today.
Nice. Imagine the most formidable version of yourself and start becoming that today. I love it.
Yeah.
So in other words, imagine your future the way you want it and start living it now.
Yeah, because I feel like we always, underestimate the time it takes to get there.
Yeah.
And it takes longer, but we also overestimate the amount of effort it takes to get there. And so we end up essentially delaying things almost always.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I've been guilty of that. Oh, that's going to take 2 weeks to do that work. I'm going to put it off. I finally do it. It took 3 hours.
I'm like that with my taxes.
Yeah, right.
Luckily, I delegate that.
Smart. Oh man, this has been fun. I really want to give a big thank you to Mamal Amini, CEO of GovernGPT, for being on this episode of The Customer Wins. Go check out Mamal's website at governGPT.ai. And don't forget to check out Quick at quickforms.com, where we make processing forms easy. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. We'll click the like button and share this with someone. or even subscribe to our channels for future episodes of The Customer Wins. Mamal, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Customer Wins podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.